We're like a mission-driven bank that finances affordable housing. We're an independent state agency, so we keep our own lights on. And while that can be challenging, it means we can do some creative things. Next slide. Basically, what we do is single family and multifamily housing. It's pretty straightforward, and increasingly partnerships and economic development. Go to the next slide. And we'll skip this one too. Basically what this slide is saying, we do a lot of housing. All right, so what are we talking about today? HMFA has the first and currently only in the nation statewide hospital and housing program. It's at scale with multiple health systems, multiple hospitals all at the same time. What we did is we created a way for hospitals to directly invest in the creation of affordable housing. And so they could create developments on or near their hospital sites, their campuses, that have a set aside for frequent utilizers of their emergency department and inpatient services. We had seen a real need for additional supportive housing. And of course, as an HFA or PHA, we never have enough money and we never have enough subsidy. And the hospitals were increasingly identifying a need for affordable housing for the people that their patients. And then what they realized is, well, there isn't any. There's not nearly enough affordable housing. So how are we going to partner together? So we proposed a program, as I said, to have hospitals help us, to partner with us to build affordable housing on or near their hospital site, really leveraging themselves as anchor institutions in their community and having a set aside of 10 or so units for those frequent utilizers, those familiar faces. And even better, if they wanted to have first floor commercial clinical space, something that would be used by the community to further preventative care. So, next slide, Steve. Let's back up for a second. If you're not familiar with frequent utilizers, frequent users, sometimes people say familiar faces. We'll do a little bit of background on this. Housing first is the idea that you need housing first, housing before services in order to be stable, safe, decent, and affordable housing. The frequent utilizers are people that are high-cost users that tend to present in the ER over and over again. Well, now through a variety of studies across the country, but you can see here too that we're in New Jersey specifically, we've shown that it is far and away less expensive to provide housing and wraparound services for people than it is for them to present in the ER. So it's better for people, it's better for the payers, it's better all around. In these examples here, you can see that when people with had a voucher program where we were able to identify some of these frequent utilizers at the hospital, place them in permanent supportive housing in the first year alone, and then the savings only grow over time as people get better, there was 60 to 78% cost reductions, because once, living on the street, having unstable housing, not surprisingly, is really hard on your health. It's hard to take your meds, it's hard to hold down a job, it's hard to get well if you don't have safe, decent, affordable housing. Moreover, once people are housed, they were also less likely to, say, be picked up on the street for loitering or obviously end up in a shelter. So there's a lot of public institution savings once people have housing. All right, next slide. Okay, so we identified that we need more money for affordable housing, and hospitals have now more and more recognized the need for affordable housing. Whether it's the frequent utilizers, or many have said that their own staff, be it low-income staff to the administrators and the doctors, they want more good quality housing on or near their hospital sites. These major anchor institutions in their communities are perfect for partnering with the neighborhood, and working together is really a win-win. You can go to the next slide. Here's some gratuitous photos of affordable housing. Sometimes when I'm doing these presentations, people are not familiar with affordable housing, and You have to show that it's not scary. Next slide. All right. Okay. So how did we go about setting up this partnership? In the summer of 2018, my boss and I said, all right, we've seen the data. We've seen that providing permanent supportive housing to the familiar faces of the ER is just good public policy. We went to the Hospital Association and said, what do you think about this? Do you think that hospitals would directly contribute capital into partnering in affordable housing? And they said yes. They said that as people move towards value-based payments, as people look to fulfill their obligations of the Affordable Care Act, as they talk about social determinants of health, they more and more recognize this need. So after the first blessing from the Hospital Association, we appropriated $12 million in investment. And then we started talking to hospitals directly all over the state, started to get them comfortable, get their thoughts. What did they think? What do they need in their communities? By that winter, we sent out a letter and said, look, this is not a formal application. This is not binding. This is you raising your hand. This is what we would like. We would like to see you come with some land. We'd like it to be near your hospital. We would like to maybe see some clinical space on the first floor, and we would like some units for the frequent utilizer population. Are you interested? We got 8 different health systems. We had said that we had enough money to work with 3 or 4. We have 8. By the next summer, we had our first commitments, and I'm happy to say that as of today, we've expanded our pool to $30 million, and we have 6 health systems and counting working with us right now. All right, go to the next slide. All right, so here's the nitty gritty. What did this actually look like? And like I said, I work for an HFA. Every single one of you has an HFA, and there is no reason why you can't, well, I was going to say go back home, but everyone is stuck at home. There's no reason why you can't call up your HFA today and say, we want to do this together. It's good business for you. It's good business for us. We knew that this was new territory for the hospitals, and we wanted to make it as easy and as replicable as possible. So we put together a capital stack that would not be competitive. We said, okay, we will jump if we use a 4% tax credit, we'll jump you ahead of the queue. It's not competitive. You'll get a loan, and, put simply, there will be a large gap. There will probably be a $7 or $8 million gap left in the project. And this is where the funds that we set aside come in. We told the hospitals, okay, there will be a big gap, and we will split that with you. We'll pay half if you pay half. To make it even easier on them, we said, okay, if you don't want to come to the table with those $3 or $4 million, we will loan it to you directly. HMFA loaning to the hospital. And that is what most of them are doing. That comes out to only like $150,000 a year for the hospital, which for most is not very much money. And in many of these cases, not only are they getting a new building, which can be an investment for them, they're getting a set aside of units for familiar faces that can ultimately get them cost savings in the ER, but they're getting a clinical space which they may not be paying any rent on at all, which would easily be $150,000 a year. So it's win-win-win all over the place for the hospital. For the HFA, we're getting a new line of business, 2 very good loans. Most hospitals have great credit ratings. These are all bondable. We were able to identify some rental assistance for the frequent users to make it easier. And we asked them to come with the land if at all possible. We didn't require that, but I'm happy to say that in every case, even in some of the high cost urban areas, they were able to come or get some land from the city. Okay, go to the next slide. We can skip this one too. Okay, so what else is in it for us? As I said, HMFA is getting 2 really quality loans out of this that are in our portfolio. They're bondable loans. They have great ratings. We are getting this because the hospitals are putting in so much direct cash to this, it is the largest influx of private capital into affordable housing we've ever seen in New Jersey. It is a huge amount of subsidy that we would not have had otherwise. It's affordable housing we wouldn't have had, it's new partnerships. And I'm happy. I don't have board approved examples that I can show you today, but I'm happy to talk about them kind of off the record. We had two of our newer hospital partnerships are with public housing authorities. So we have one where the housing authority is serving as the lead developer. And that is in a very tight urban site. They're going to have an urgent care on the first floor to divert people from the ER. They're going to have parking, and they're going to have a building above it. Another one in Atlantic City is using it to relocate one of their buildings and expand. And they are partnering with a private developer, but they are bringing the land. So we're starting to see these creative partnerships where it's not just the hospital and a private developer, but housing authorities are getting involved as well. Go to the next slide. This is some example financing. You all are probably pretty familiar with what tax credit financing looks like. It's a little oversimplified here, but go to the next slide. The next one. Okay. And finally, I wanted to talk about how this has been so successful, and as we've seen it replicate with the 6 and counting hospitals across New Jersey, that the health systems have all started talking to us about, okay, it's great to have this one building. It's great to have some primary care that can divert people from the ER, but what next? What about the substandard housing in the neighborhood that's triggering asthma and kids are coming into the ER? What can we do about that? So we're also going to be doing a partnership to address those kinds of toxins and everything else in the surrounding neighborhood, partnering with local groups. And we've been exploring with our bond council that we can, even in, as long as it's not the majority of basis, we can fund and finance those first floor fit ups. So one reason, at least in New Jersey, we don't see more healthcare use in the commercial space in our affordable housing buildings is how expensive it is to fit out a doctor's office or any kind of urgent care. But we have gotten the opinion from our usually sort of conservative attorneys general's office that's very risk averse about these things, that we are able to finance those health uses in this building, which is just another reason it's good business for us. Okay. So in conclusion, it's good for us. It's great for the hospitals. I'm happy to talk about in more detail what kinds of conversations and narratives got the hospitals on board and made them comfortable with this, and how you can replicate it in your own states. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Katie. And just so you guys know, all of our speakers have profiles on the app and on the agenda. It's kind of the same thing. You can reach out to Katie and any other speakers today if you want their contact information. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Renee and Chris from Denver Housing Authority.
Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. Can you go to the next slide? So the mission at Denver Housing Authority is a large housing authority. We are the largest housing authority in this region. And our mission is to serve residents of the Denver Housing Authority by designing, owning, and operating safe, decent, and affordable housing in a manner that promotes thriving communities. Next slide. Just to give you a little bit of background about DHA, we provide subsidized housing to more than 12,000 low-income families and more than 26,000 people. Almost half of our residents are children. About a quarter of our residents are senior citizens and people with disabilities. About a quarter of our residents are working age adults. Half of this population are single parents with children under the age of 12. Next slide. I'm the Director of Resident and Community Services. Our resident support programming at Denver Housing Authority is so intensive and such a high priority that we have 2 departments that support residents to improve quality of life. The Resident Community Services programming is designed to improve quality of life for residents of DHA and neighboring communities by offering empowering opportunities, economic enhancement services, and vibrant living environments. Next. DHA owns and manages properties, public housing, which is property that we own. We own that has, we have 8 family communities, 14 senior disabled buildings, and 1,200 scattered site. We also provide Section 8 housing choice vouchers in the city of Denver to over 7,000 families. DHA is also a real estate developer. 3 sites have just been completed in the city of Denver. Sun Valley is a family site that is currently undergoing a complete neighborhood revitalization, which is being led by DHA's real estate division. Mariposa was formerly Sun Valley Public Housing. It's been redeveloped from 100% public housing to mixed income. The density there tripled, I think, about 3 times. Denver Housing Authority has a partnership with the city and county of Denver to create more affordable housing through the D3 initiative, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Next slide. So resident and community service programming is designed to support residents through 4 program areas. Economic self-sufficiency, we're trying to help them those that can transition to economic self-sufficiency and off of subsidized housing. For senior citizens and people with disabilities, that's not a realistic goal normally. So for them, we're helping them to age in place by providing supportive service. Youth development, that's up on the economic self-sufficiency track for later in life. And then community leadership and engagement. And then we have a cross-cutting coalition. None of these really can be achieved very well in the current times without access to computers and internet. So we have a digital inclusion effort that crosses all of those. Next slide. Aging in place, I want to talk a little bit because this is a focus area in the project that Chris will talk about at 655 Broadway. So across the Housing Authority in all of our communities, aging in place programming is provided by service coordinators at all public housing sites to address health and wellness needs of seniors and people with disabilities so that they can improve their quality of life and age in place. The goal here is to keep them living independently at the Denver Housing Authority, help provide services so that they don't need to go to assisted living, nursing homes, or eviction. Services include a variety of topics, including medical, dental, mental health, and substance abuse services, social events, transportation, food, nutrition, fitness, activities of daily living, gardening. As I'm sure you can guess, this has been particularly difficult during COVID-19, and we've really had to ramp up in that area. Next slide. D3 is DHA delivers for Denver. Denver's affordable housing, I don't know if you guys know because you don't live in Denver, but affordable housing is tough in Denver. And we've not been able to keep up with the need, particularly for low and moderate income. In 2016, the city of Denver approved the Affordable Housing Fund. This approved an allocation of its lawful property tax revenue to support affordable housing programs and established one-time development fees on new development. In 2018, the city of Denver adopted a 5-year housing plan, which outlined assistance and stabilization programs for low-income renters and initiatives to encourage a greater supply of apartments and other affordable housing. To facilitate the 5-year plan, the city engaged with DHA as a partner to accelerate the development, rehab, and preservation of affordable housing and for development of permanent supportive housing for low-income persons. In August of 18, the city and county of Denver established an intergovernmental agency agreement for this purpose. Next slide. Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, great. So just to touch on the D3 program a little bit, and we'll start diving into the 655 Broadway. Some of the D3 funds that Renee is mentioning are really propelling our development pipeline in the Sun Valley neighborhood, which has a $30 million C&I grant we received a few years back. So it's an additive part of the capital stack to move that forward. Westridge Homes on the bottom is another redevelopment. So essentially our development pipeline really accelerated and gives a lot of opportunity for additional affordable housing units throughout the city and county of Denver. Next slide, please. Is that the next slide?
Did we skip a slide?
Okay, can you maybe go to the next slide? Okay, here. So, and then last part. Great.
Is it this one, Chris?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, great. Sorry.
So last part of the D3 program is this project we're talking about, which is 655 Broadway, which is one of our housing and healthcare models we're working on. And you can go to the next slide, Stephen. And this slide here, just to kick this off, 655 Broadway, it's a project that we're working with Denver Health and Hospital Authority, who serves about 1/3 of the residents of Denver for their medical needs. And this slide really sums up what Katie really talked about well, is all the benefits, all the pros of partnering housing with hospitals. It's expensive to have people in hospital beds. The hospital wants to save that money, invest it elsewhere, free up more beds, get chronic emergency room users in a safe place that they hopefully won't be back in the emergency room. So we partnered with Denver Health probably 2 years ago on this idea of, they have a problem. They want to find housing. They want to discharge patients. We want to provide affordable housing. So this is a great partnership in providing the continuum of housing from homelessness with nowhere to go to SRO units, which are single resident occupancy units, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and then onward to affordable rental housing, market housing, and then home ownership as well. So a lot of benefits that Katie mentioned are the same kind of program here is what we're trying to achieve. Next slide, please. So what differences with what Katie mentioned is we don't have a really program like that set up in Denver or Colorado that offers hospitals an idea to do this. So what we did is we partnered with Denver Health, and we're kind of carving out this program with them. And this is the opportunity we saw, is that 655 Broadway, that picture's in the lower left-hand corner. It's a 10-story office building that Denver Health and Hospital Authority used to have as their headquarters, and their new office building is in the background of that picture to the left of the building. So over the years, that building has been sitting vacant. 10 stories, large building, great community room areas, and it's right on the edge of their campus. If you look at the map on the right-hand side, essentially everything above 655 Broadway, which is the building with that red dot on it, all those red brick buildings is Denver Health's campus, and with their new office building to the left of 655. So it's a great location. It's on for those familiar with Denver, it's right on a critical intersection of Spear Boulevard, Broadway, and 6th Avenue, and then there's that trail and Cherry Creek River running through there too, which offers a great opportunity for multimodal transportation, walking, just being outside. So the building was built in 1950. It's about 74,000 square feet. It's not being used. Denver Health was trying to figure out what to do with it, and so it just led to a great opportunity, a great partnership. And I also mentioned that through the development process, we learned it's actually a historic eligible building too, which we're going to talk about how that actually is going to help finance some of these upgrades too. So next slide, please. So the opportunity was there, and this is kind of what we worked out with Denver Health to move this forward. And the deal is that this building will be repurposed. We'll do a lot of abatement to get asbestos out, and then we'll do selective demolition and then repurpose it into a 110 senior disabled affordable housing property. And out of those 110 units, 14 will be single resident occupancy units for temporary transitional housing. Which in this case we'll get a referral agreement from Denver Health to refer qualified discharge patients into those 14 SRO units, and those will all be on the first above second floor, so right above the lobby. Those 14 SRO units, and SRO units, or single resident occupancy, is really a fancy name for a studio. They're 350 or a micro unit, depending where you are in the country. They're 350 to 400 square feet. These will be furnished, so they'll have a bed, some chairs, some cooking stuff. They'll have a little kitchen, a range, a microwave, a refrigerator. So they're pretty nice units where one could live for a while and get back on their feet after they're discharged from the hospital and they need a safe and a healthy place to stay. So that's the 14 SRO units, and then all the units above will be consisting of 96 one-bedroom permanent affordable housing units. So with an area median income of a range between 60 and 30% AMI. Important to note that. Sorry, I'll speed it up.
Sorry, Chris. No. Okay. I wasn't trying to play the exit music. It was just my finger slipped.
Other notable facts is, in addition to just providing these housing units, the 14 SRO 96 one bedrooms, there'll be a lot of supportive wraparound services for these residents in these units. Denver Health will have some staff on board, full-time, located in the building with offices, and they can really coordinate different support they need, whether it be physical therapy, addiction services, or whatever they need. They can help support that. As well as Denver Housing Authority, we will have our resident service coordinator team, which is led by Renee, and what she was mentioning earlier. They'll be housed at this building too. So a lot of supportive services to help with the housing, and basically how the mechanics of this and who brought what. DHA just recently purchased the building in May of this year, and then Denver Health and Hospital is doing a 99-year ground lease with DHA to lease the ground. So, next slide, please. Like any good deal, you can never do it alone. So these are not all of our partners by any chance, but some of the notable ones I wanted to mention. Denver, the city and county of Denver is the D3 funding source, which Renee and I mentioned. So they are bringing essentially financing to the table. Denver Health and Hospital, they sold us the building. They'll provide the land at a nominal ground lease fee. They'll refer the tenants for the SRO units on the second floor, and then they'll also provide the supportive services. Colorado Department of Housing, they are also bringing funding to the table to make this happen. Enterprise Community Partners, they're doing a terrific job right now. They're providing expertise on the healthy housing and how do we make all these partnerships ink out into a contract in terms of, supportive services, referrals, and who's doing what. And it's really, distilling all the conceptual ideas down to paper and really getting down to the nitty gritty of what exactly the deal terms are with everything. And it involves a lot of people, both on the DHA side and the Denver Health side, to figure out, make sure we're doing it right. CHAFA, the Colorado Housing Finance Authority, which is essentially the Colorado version of what Katie leads, and this is financed by 4% low-income housing tax credits and state affordable housing tax credits. And then DHA, we will act as the lead developer, the owner, the operator, and provide the supportive services as well. So a lot of partners, and there's more behind the screen, but here we'll keep moving. Next slide, please.
Chris, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
Just wanted to highlight the fact that in this building, one floor is dedicated to the patients in Denver Health and Hospitals who will be in transitional housing. The rest of the building is permanent affordable housing, but on the floor for Denver Health, part of what the Denver Health staff is doing is working with those patients to try to find them permanent affordable housing. So although there are 14 units, if we're looking at a potentially 3-month stay, you're doing 14 times 3 months, so maybe 50 to 60 households a year who could be coming through this building and opening up those beds in the hospital.
So this is just, I know there's a lot of housing folks in the audience, so this is kind of the subsidy and the financing overview of it. This is the last slide, but essentially the total hard cost for the redevelopment is about $28 million. Well, not hard and soft costs, but a lot of it's, buying the building, it's land, it's construction, and a lot of design and soft costs. Down on the bottom left is the project sources, or the capital stack. As you can see, there's a lot of different sources with different partners. The nice thing is this is a historic building, so we are going after historic preservation tax credits, where we could, bridge that financing gap and add some additional tax credit equity to the deal. And that would be partnered with the affordable housing state credit and the 4%. There'll be permanent debt and then there'll be the D3 funds, like we mentioned, and a few other miscellaneous sources as well. As far as operating subsidies, so that's kind of how we're going to finance the development and rehabilitation. The operating subsidy on the right-hand side is there will be 36 project-based vouchers on this deal, and those won't be on the 14 SROs, but just on the other 96 units. Obviously, the tax credits provide lower rent, and then Denver Health, they're going to be providing us an operating subsidy as well for the units. So it won't be necessarily rent, but it will more be able to break-even subsidy to pay for utility costs and other expenses of the building. Oh, and then lastly, this is a rendering on the lower right-hand corner of what we're looking at in terms of there'll be an outdoor patio here for the residents to get some fresh air and get outside. A lot of community room spaces with a lot of windows and get some visibility to Broadway and get people activated on the street front. And then the majority of the offices back here are both for Denver Housing Authority staff and then Denver Health staff. So there's a lot of common areas that are dedicated to the supportive services. So on that, I'll stop sharing and hand it back over to you, Stephen.
Great. Well, thank you all for those presentations. We received a couple questions in the chat, so I thought we'd just start with those. If you're in the audience and do have questions for the panel, let us know. So first, just to clarify and make sure we're clear, in 655 Broadway, are those transitional housing units, or are those units where people are signing leases?
They're transitional, so yeah.
Well, the one floor is transitional. All the other
Correct.
units of that floor, they're signing leases. It's permanent housing for them.
Right.
Great. So the other two, I don't know who wants to tackle these. So let's start with this one. Just hearing more about the financing of services. We got the question, speak more about financing the healthcare component of these housing interventions.
When I saw that question pop up, I didn't know if it was in reference to when I said that we could, as the HFA, pay for the clinical space and the floor. And that is, while our developments are still under construction right now, that's really as simple as, instead of paying for fit out of kitchens and bathrooms in an apartment, we basically got an opinion that we're able to pay for the healthcare space as though it were a community room. And we just thought that might be a little bit of a stretch, but so far they said it's okay, and that's okay under our bond regulations. And so it's as straightforward as that. There's really nothing special about it. It's just a regular HFA loan. And in terms of the services, that was, and I'm sure that Renee and Chris have more comments about this as well, but that was probably one of the biggest language learning experiences, at least for me, when we were talking to the hospitals, when I said services and what they thought I meant as services. And we made it clear that, no, we would love for you as the hospital, surely, to have the residents as your patients. But when I say services, I mean service providers that outside of yourself that are going to be providing wraparound services, and how you pay for that, just as though at the same way we would pay for it in any other tax credit building, whether it's some sort of outside operating, whether it's paid for through revenues of the building, but those sorts of things. But all of our health partners so far are really stepping up, and they are providing additional kind of targeted services that are part of their goals, whether it's family reunification or healthy food access, in addition to the other typical wraparound services.
For us, there's a lot of studies that show, and we see it because we have service coordinators at every single public housing site at Denver Housing Authority, that when you have service coordination on site and you're able to bring the services in for the residents, you're reducing turnover of units, you're reducing damage of units, you're increasing the residents' ability to age in place in a healthy way. So for us, we have it as a priority within the agency. And at this property, Chris, you just have it written into operating funds, right?
Yeah, so this is a little unique on this building, is we wanted to really hammer down the services and make sure that they're there and robust. And so we wrote it in the pro forma, and So we also took a little less developer fee, which means we could carry less debt, which means we could, pay for more supportive services. So it was a little kind of, we're using some of the traditional financing that Renee uses on the greater portfolio, but in addition, we're also writing some of it into the pro forma for the operating for the operating pro forma here.
And this will be an interesting partnership because Denver Health will be there with their own staff, providing direct services, medical, mental health to their patients.
Right.
Our service coordinator will provide supportive service and community engagement activities to everyone in the building, including their patients. And so it'll be a really good collaboration.
And to build on that, Renee, in my experience, some of the health systems we were working with had a really clear understanding of what this would look like, and others not as much. And they weren't aware, I think, of how much of a priority, the PHA or HFA makes the provision of services, and that it's not a foreign concept to the developers, and that this is something that we're used to providing and working with in the buildings. And that once they understood that, it gave them, I think, a lot of comfort.
Well, and to your point earlier, it is interesting because what one might assume services means, the other one doesn't always. So we've had several meetings with the hospital because they think this and we do this. And so it's just that marriage and communication of how do you understand what each other's doing and how can you accentuate each other and support each other.
Yeah.
So we had a quick question here. I think this is for DHA from Becky Slemons at the American Cancer Society. She does a lot of work on smoke-free housing. She asked if the housing you're developing here is going to be smoke-free, and if so, how did that go over with residents? I would add my own part to that. Like, was that a condition that Denver Health insisted on as part of this?
All of our housing is smoke-free. And as a person in charge of the resident engagement, I can tell you the engagement was pretty ramped up there for a while because the rule came down from HUD, so we didn't have the choice. We had to implement that protocol. So we had thousands of residents across the agency to whom we're telling you can't smoke on DHA property anymore. So we have local resident councils that are led by residents and supported by service coordinators. We have them at every site. And so we let them speak and we let them vent. We gave them contact information for HUD because that wasn't a decision we made. It was a decision that they made. So it was a little bit of a rocky road for a minute, but now we're fine. And all residents of DHA understands that that's the protocol. We have smoking shelters at many of our sites so that they can go the distance from the building and smoke outside.
And to add to that, we were looking at, so this building will be smoke-free, and we were thinking about maybe having a smoking shelter on the property, like Renee was talking about. But Denver Health's campus is also smoke-free, so it made that decision a lot easier. And so there will be no smoking shelter. And they own their ground leasing us the land, so it is still part of the Denver Health campus. So this will be, I don't think we can have a smoking shelter in this one either. But.
And the service coordinators, one of their programs is tobacco cessation. So we'll be working on that project.
Great. Okay, so this is the classic policy partnership question that, so Dave asked, what's your greatest challenge? So there's that general frame. And then more specifically, to what extent is NIMBYism a challenge for you all in these specific projects?
Chime in, going in backwards order. For us so far, NIMBYism, which tends to be a pervasive problem, I'm sure many places, particularly in suburban New Jersey for us, has not been an issue at all here. And I think that part of it, I think there's a couple things that have helped with that. One, health institutions are such major anchors that they tend to have some degree, and often a very strong relationship with the municipality. So that's helped a lot because they're huge employers, they're just huge bases in the community. So we had really good partnerships. All the cities were extremely supportive and kind of ushering through a lot of the approval processes on this. And in many cases, it was city or hospital-owned land, and so we weren't worried about that part either. That's not to say that nothing will come up, but we while that's something we experience in lots of our projects, it wasn't here. In terms of the greatest challenge outside of the financing, because for us, the financing wasn't the issue since we were the ones providing that. I think it really was that the projects came to us so much earlier. Usually something is more fully baked by the time it gets to the HFA, but here we were, as we were insinuating earlier, really learning one another's languages and have spent a lot of time kind of hand-holding. And I thought, I was foolish enough to think in the beginning that some of the health systems, once they had identified their developer, would take a little bit of a step back. And that has not been the case at all. And I think to the benefit of the project, but it has just meant it's a longer experience of kind of working together and deciding what this project, each individual project is going to look like for the community. And so it's been a journey, but so far so good. Great. And one more thing. The greatest challenges, no disrespect to any CFOs, have been the hospital CFOs. That I think that I was joking to Chris the other day that sometimes their hospitals are mostly nonprofits. So when they hear tax credits, think, oh, well, we don't need tax credits. All right, well, they're not for you. And just think of it as money. And I think that their job is to be risk averse and make sure the hospital doesn't get itself into something crazy. But by and large, the CEOs were thrilled with this, really understood the importance. The clinical staff really gets it. The government affairs staff really gets it. And what helped kind of get over the nerves is we would bring in our CFO and they would have a chat and say, like, look, no, you're not going to be a landlord. No, this is not risky. These are the things you actually have to worry about. Yes, truly, you're only going to be on the hook for your contribution, et cetera, and just kind of, again, spend some time learning one another's language. That was kind of the only real obstacle that's been a barrier until we've had those conversations.
So that's actually a good transition. One of our questions, I think Katie, you might have already answered it, but one of the questions we got in the chat was providing examples of like how your institutions work differently than hospitals. Like, I would attribute this to like culture differences, organizational culture, and also, what drives success and what's considered appropriate, scope of work. And I think what you got at with the CFO is right on, exactly like pinpointing. You might need to link up those two that speak a common language across organizations. So I'd be curious to hear from DHA or Katie if you have other examples of those sort of predictable conflicts that you can plan for in advance.
I think Renee kind of touched on it, and for us is it everything we just talked about, like putting it sounds good and it feels good and it will be good, but putting it all on paper and getting down to the details, and just on the DHA side, it involves 4 or 5 different departments and collaborating with all those people, and then shifting what we think works to the Denver Health side, which requires 4 or 5, requires nursing, doctors, CFO. There's just a lot of people, and especially within the COVID environment, Denver Health's got, quite a lot on their plate as it is. And so I think starting early is definitely something that is a good thing to do, and just kind of working through all the details. And there's a referral agreement, there's a subsidy agreement, there's a housing services agreement, there's a license agreement to access the property. And each one of those agreements taps 3 or 4 different departments within both agencies, and just getting all that on paper and to a point where everyone is agreeable on it is a challenge and something.
So those are big meetings.
Yeah, getting ahead.
Lots of people in chairs.
Yeah,
it looks nice.
Especially now we're all zooming.
When you present on it, it looks like symbiotic, but I'm sure those rooms were not without.
Yeah, like just getting down to the brass tacks of what referral means and what it doesn't mean and what. Yeah. So, but it's it's a necessary process, and when you're done with it, it's pretty sweet because you get a really good product, and it's hopefully a well-oiled machine.
But on that point, I think that the communication is critical, because you're at the front of the project, and if you roll the project out and you haven't worked out all these pieces, you're going to have some problems. So for us, We have big rooms with lots of people with flip chart papers up on the walls and colored stickies, and we're all writing, what do we think about this, where are the priorities, so that even if, you know, you can't all agree all the time, but at least you've presented the opportunity to have the discussion and to share ideas, and then you can come to common ground.
Okay, so one last question, and maybe there will be some conversation about it. So Linda Flores-Tober, I think she's from Paterson, New Jersey, asked, how can you prevent gentrification in the surrounding area and the surrounding neighborhood? She says, otherwise you might become islands. How do you keep the neighborhood mixed so that it continues to be affordable housing for those living there? Do you guys have any? If you have a silver bullet, that would be great, but.
Hello, fellow New Jerseyan, and I figured it had to be someone who was familiar. So I didn't even mention Paterson, but yes, the first project that we have is in Paterson, and you're absolutely right. And Linda, that is one reason why we quickly, I think even the word that my boss used was island, and we knew that one shiny new building was not going to be enough, and that is why we quickly decided to invest money in the existing housing that is there and make sure that for the low income residents that are in the surrounding area, we know that there is a lot of, like in many urban areas in New Jersey, really old housing stock that may need some healthy homes type interventions. There's a lot of overcrowding in Paterson. And then, so that's something that we're being really cognizant of, okay, how do we make those, how do we address that without putting anyone at risk or at risk of eviction? How do we make sure that we can improve their living situation while also holding those units as affordable and not fixing something up that then the landlord will jack up the rent and and try and get them out of there. But you're right, there's no silver bullet, but we're trying to kind of make the whole neighborhood as strong as possible for the people that currently live there.
I'm encouraging people to literally take a fresh air break. You know, sitting in front of the computer this long can be a lot. I am chained to my seat today, but please do not follow my example. Go out onto your patio, open a window, whatever you can do. Just take a quick lap around the hall, whatever. But I just want to thank everybody for their time and attention in this session. I wish Renee, Chris, and Katie, we can give you a resounding applause. I don't know how that's possible here, but I certainly thought this was a great conversation, and I really appreciate you all being part of this conference. And I think it was such a wonderful discussion to have and practical insights that our attendees could use. So thank you all for your time and your patience. These speakers have gone through a couple different trainings with us, so I also just want to give a shout out to their hard work.